Hello and welcome to the Breakfast Buffet. My name is Jorge Shaft and you are listening to the second part of it, where I do deal with general knowledge and just interesting sort of information. Part one covers, of course, the news for today, the 6th of April 2020. As you can see, it's a little bit darker now than it was in part one, partially because, that's a bit our time, but also because of the fact that it's not actually my first attempt doing part one. I have to admit, I actually really screwed up doing the first sort of recording, live stream of part one. And so in the end, I just decided, you know what? Delete, go over this again, and do it again. But let's go and not waste any more time. Because, of course, I kind of did, really. And that is by saying, what is fame? So I talked a lot about fame in the first part. I'm going to have to channel sort of all of that kind of attitude, all of that approach into this discussion yet again. But just talk about the fact that I've been thinking a lot about fame. I've been thinking about the concept. I've been thinking about sort of like the implications, the sort of the philosophical kind of circumstances around it, if you will, and about really what it says about society, the way that we do fame. The first, there's been, historically, there are two main ways of getting famous. I was reading about them actually in a book that I covered recently, such as called Don't Stop Reading the News by Rolf Dobelli. It's a really, really good book, really interesting. But in this section, it had this bit where it was talking about historically, there are only really two ways of getting famous. The first way was to be accomplished, to achieve something and to have like something big there to your name. A classic where this would really matter whether it was like you're a philosopher, musician, writer, scientist, mathematician, whatever it was. You were somebody who got extremely good at some field and then contributed, if you will, to like the greater um, existence, the greater history of the human species through that contribution. A classic one that I think of as just to really illustrate that point is Plato. Plato was, well, even in his day, quite well known. He was the teacher at the Philosophy Academy in Athens. There he taught a whole bunch of people who would go on to be big in their own right, including, among others, Aristotle, who famously went on to teach Alexander the Great. However, Plato isn't just remembered just for that. In his time, he wrote lots and lots of very, very important, very interesting books, not books, but like, texts about philosophy, about his ideas, and about the way he thought things should run. Plato's Republic, for example, huge text describing, it's like a story almost, describing sort of how the ideal government is like, what the perfect system should be, and then talking about how political systems degrade over time. He actually said that democracy was the second worst stage, which is, shows he was a man of his time. But that's still a big contribution. He contributed a lot to the idea of there being a perfect sort of thing to everything that you want, the idea of heaven, the ideal. This is undoubtedly a huge contribution. This was undoubtedly a big sort of advancement and a big sort of fire starter, if you will, in the field of philosophy. And Plato rightly was famous and is so remembered for having that accomplishment. Now, the other second big way in which someone would be sort of famous or well known historically would be if they had power. One person I think of, for example, a lot, who really illustrates this point, was Henry VI of England. By some counts, Henry VI of England was the worst king that Britain ever had. He completely lost control of the sort of noble factions within his country. He lost control of the war in France. Basically, he was the one who lost the Hundred Years' War for Britain. And he also was catastrophically bad at just distributing sort of properties, if you will, which was one of the most important sort of things that a king in the 14th century would have to do. Sorry, 1400s, not 14th century. To just, was distributing land, distributing resources, some to his supporters, some to the people he needed on side. Henry VI was terrible at that. If he was alive today, he'd probably, though, be sort of a philanthropist or even working in the charity sector. He famously started a lot of sort of colleges and places of worship. He started lots of churches. Eton College, for example, the famous school, and by some counts, the most prestigious school in Britain, that was started by Henry VI of Britain, of England. However, he was, even though he was manifestly bad at the job of being the King of England, he ended up dying because of a rebellion that took over and shipped him away to the Tower of London and chopped his head off and basically killed him. They claimed it was a broken heart, but it's like, no, you killed him. Even though he was manifestly bad at that job, he still held a lot of power. And the people around him as well, a lot of the people who were engaged in the schemes and the policies around the Wars of the Roses, whether they were Yorkist or Lancastrian, whether they were supporting him or not, they were still incredibly relevant because of the power they held, because of the fact that what they said had a direct, causal, and outsized influence on how people lived. For example, I often think about the fact that one of Henry VI's main key supporters, and often a bit kind of useless during that time, was the Duke of Somerset. Now, again, he was kind of the same thing. He was a bit kind of happy-go-lucky. He was somebody who wanted to sort of get as much wealth as possible, and that was about it. But he was still the old lord and the ruler, if you will, of Somerset and a few other areas. And if you lived in Somerset during this time, the Duke of Somerset was a directly important person in your life. He was somebody who, if you had a problem, if you had a petition for the government and it was important enough, it would go to him. So historically, whenever you had someone who was famous, those were the two main reasons. Either they were someone who had a big accomplishment, or they were someone who had power. And there are very, very few exceptions to those rules. One that I keep thinking a lot, that I think about as a potential exception to that, and Rolf de Belly points this out one too in reading the news, is Heraclitus. Heraclitus, sorry. He was basically this arsonist in the 400s BC who decided, you know what? The Temple of Artemis is one of the most famous and sort of revered buildings in the world, in the sort of the ancient world. Basically everyone in kind of the Greek kind of world of just like higher culture knew about this fabulous, fantastic temple. It even appears in the Civilization games, fun fact. And he decided that he wanted to become famous just for the sake of being famous, and that he would do so by burning it down. So he snuck up to the temple one night, set it ablaze, and then the next morning, when they were still fighting the fire, he's like, oh yeah, I did that. I wanted to be famous. I did that. But even then, it's a bit of a philosophical minefield there, really, isn't it? On some counts, you could argue that Heraclitus's achievement was, in fact, an accomplishment of sorts. I mean, but the morality of it, that's a different question. I mean, you can argue that potentially sneaking up to a place of worship in the middle of the night just to set it on fire and then to claim the credit. So you could claim that that is, you know, an accomplishment, but is it really? And, is it ethical? No, very definitely not. But that said, his mission was accomplished. His name has even been passed down to to the present day. We even still have the term Herocratic fame, which is the fame you get for committing, something gross and horrible and evil. Now they say that mass shooters and criminals and people who lead genocidal regimes get Herocratic fame because they're famous because of the terrible thing they did. And now in the modern world, a lot of this is still true. There are still quite a fair few people who are famous because of those two things. Donald Trump, for example, is famous because he was the president of the United States and was the largest and most powerful country in the world. That man has got thousands of nuclear weapons at his fingertips. And justifiably, he is a famous man for that. If you are living in the United States and you have some kind of a big issue that you want to petition, you want to fix, he is, at the end of the day, the man that you have to appeal to and who you have to sort of write to, petition to get the change you want done. So he is directly relevant to the lives of people in the United States. There are, of course, also those who are very, very accomplished, and they're famous for that as well. And I don't just mean the usual scientists and philosophers, but even some who you might think are even a bit less, maybe a little bit downgraded for that. Musicians, for example. There are still lots of musicians who are very famous and are obviously very talented and who clearly have contributed something important to the history of music, who are alive today, and they are rightly given a lot of credit for those accomplishments. However, in the modern world, we do have almost a third category. We've got celebrities, people who are famous because they're famous. And the reason why they got famous in the first place is often a bit secondary. One of the people who is classically always cited as the person of almost like the symbol of gross celebrity, of just like, this person's just famous because they're famous, nothing else, is Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian's father was Robert Kardashian, and in 1995, Robert Kardashian was the attorney, lawyer, who represented O.J. Simpson in what was one of the most controversial and most spoken about trials of all time, really. O.J. Simpson's girlfriend had been murdered in cold blood, horribly, and it looked like the sporting star, who was considered one of the best American football players ever, was on trial for it and accused of it. Famously, Robert Kardashian came up with a successful defense, ultimately, at the end of the day, of if it doesn't fit, then acquit. Basically, near the scene of the murder was this sort of latex glove, and it's kind of covered in blood. And the thought was quite quickly reached that, this glove must have been worn by the murderer so that the blood from the murder victim would not get on their hands. A fairly reasonable deduction to make. And, even though it's got all those gruesome implications. Now, Robert Kardashian, maybe a bit dubiously, came to the conclusion in his defense that if the glove was not the same size as O.J. Simpson's hand, then how could this glove possibly be worn by O.J. Simpson during the murder. No, he wouldn't have been able to put it on, he wouldn't have been able to fit it. As it turned out, during the trial, that glove indeed did not fit properly in O.J. Simpson's hand. And you kind of this, if it does not fit, then acquit. So there's no doubt in arguing that Robert Kardashian does fit in that first category. He, in the field of legal sort of law and sort of argumentation and trial sort of justice, Robert Kardashian is somebody who definitely had accomplishments. Somebody who did do amazing acts of something very, very transformative in the history of sort of law in the United States and also further abroad. There were a lot of interesting sort of thoughts, contemplations, discussions, debates about this defense and about the trial elsewhere. But the same cannot be said about his daughter, Kim. Now, a lot of people don't give Kim Kardashian credit because there is one thing that she is good at, even though it is not something that you could really consider that much of an accomplishment. She was very good at taking the fame which Robert Kardashian had acquired, which he had earned, if you will, and turned it on herself and made herself be famous and due to that be very, very popular. It's no accident that she's famous. Kim Kardashian is surrounded by camera crews, directors, storyboard writers. Yeah, surprise. A lot of reality TV is actually scripted and it's planned ahead of time what the participants are all going to say, what they're going to do in the show. And there's also makeup artists, there's sound engineers, light engineers, interns who go get the shopping. There's the whole 9 yards, there's press publicists, even lawyers, ironically, who all get together and make a concerted effort to promote the brand, if you will, of Kim Kardashian and keep it up in the world. Now, historically, this is a very big anomaly. There is not, until the 20th century, this is just a totally unknown phenomenon. It never happened, or almost never. There's a kind of few edge cases in the 19th century, but that's about it. It just leads you to think a few things about the nature of fame in the times in which we live. Of course, there is little debate about the fact that 2020 has become a bit of an annus horribilis, as they say in Latin, for most of us. Coronavirus pandemics going around, making people sick, ending lives early, tragically. Heck, it's even enough to make me go and decide, I'm going to spend all this time with my family. And that's what I'm doing. Actually, I'm in my parents' house for this. Even though I'm like my own home, it's like, yeah, you know what? I'd rather spend this kind of big dramatic time with people who I know. At the same time, there are other things that are terrible. Surely, the plague of celebrity could well be that in that. But is it? There are a few things which I think, in terms of the kind of almost like justifications, if you will, of this thing. The first is, what do we define as accomplishment, as talent? For example, as I mentioned earlier, Kim Kardashian undoubtedly does have a talent, and she does have an accomplishment, which is to have a reality TV show that promotes the brand of her, which promotes the brand of here is the family, and they're all very dysfunctional, and they're all very entertaining for the television. Oh, and here's the camera crews, the directors and the script writers and all the support staff who make sure that this thing stays in the public sphere, in the public mind, and on entertainment. That is an accomplishment in and of itself. Even if she did have to, no, it did start from the big head start that was Robert Kardashian's all-encompassing, all-consuming fame, credits, and laudits of having defended O.J. Simpson successfully in a trial which very, very few people, not very, very few people, but which a lot of people didn't think would see O.J. Simpson acquitted. The other thing I think is sort of the inherent nature of the fact that she is surrounded by these people. My mind drifts towards scientists a lot for this point, and drifts towards the idea of what they did, what's so great about them, and why they deserve to be famous. The classic one I jump to when I think about this, I think about sort of scientists with some amazing achievement and with something, really a huge contribution for humanity, was Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug was a Norwegian American scientist in the 20th century who sort of pioneered and created this new strain of wheat, which was much, much stronger and had higher yields than all the traditional wheats, which meant that you could create far, far more food with it. In the end, his epitaph has become, he was the man who saved 1 billion lives. He was the man through his research, through his efforts, through his, accomplishments, saved millions and millions of lives, especially in India and Pakistan and in Africa, these areas where there are often problems with growing wheat because of the weather or the wildlife sort of reaching and destroying it. That's a huge credit. And of course, he is famous for that to a certain extent. I mean, I know who he is. Some nerds know who he is, like me. Fellow scientists, of course, know who he was, especially if they're in agricultural sciences. They've probably heard about Norman Borlaug and his huge achievements. But apart from that, well, there'd be, I guess, some people who are from his hometown or who went to his school, his university. They might know him because he would be a directly cited, relevant sort of person to their sort of experience. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to the same school as this amazing scientist who did this fantastic contribution to the greater efforts and existence of the human species. But apart from that, not really that many. But again, who was he surrounded by? Kim Kardashian, I've already gone over twice what people she is surrounded by. She is surrounded by a perfect cadre, a perfect grouping for the end goal of becoming famous. Norman Borlaug, on the other hand, was like some journalists were in his life. He'd be interviewed here and there, and he certainly got high honours, so some politicians knew about him. But apart from that, well, he had fellow scientists with him. A lot of farmers worked with him. He would have, of course, had his friends and family, his personal friends, and they would have been, I'm sure, from many walks of life and from many different places, as most people tend to get in terms of their friendship group. But apart from that, there's not really all that much. And none of it really sort of contributes to becoming famous. Of course, other people, the people you're surrounded by, is inherently extremely important to whether you become famous. I've got the free dictionary up with fame up. The definition of fame is a widespread reputation, especially of a favorable character, renown, public eminence. Now, public eminence is the one that's the most important in this, because of course, public inherently means lots of people. You can't have a public of one or two or three people. It has to be large groups, it has to be a large crowd. So, it matters. It's all people you're surrounded by to have the effect of whether you become famous or not. It matters whether the sort of access, if you will, like who is saying what, I think is a better way of putting it. If you're surrounded by people who, or even just come into contact with people who don't say anything about you, who don't offer anything, who don't pass the word of your name to anybody, then you're probably going to end up in where the vast majority of people end up going, in terms of fame. And that is by not being famous. Of course, everybody is surrounded by people, and so to that certain extent, does have a little bit there. I was mentioning the first sort of attempt, and went on a big old tangent about the fact that it's extremely rare for people to not be surrounded by other people. I mean, there's a few isolated cases here and there of like children who end up being raised by animals in the wild. Always an incredibly interesting sort of scientific sort of I want to say experiment, but that's not quite the right word. Phenomenon, I think is the better word here. But always a very interesting scientific phenomenon because it does ultimately raise the question and helps answer the question of what happens when people don't get surrounded by people. Especially this is interesting in the realm of language acquisition. If you don't never talk to another person, you never acquire a language. So how is the wild man like Tarzan going to speak to anybody? But that's a big tangent, and it's so rare as to say safely and soundly that everybody is surrounded by other people all the time. And so therefore, to that tiny little extent, are in fact known. But who those people are, what they do, and what they're reporting about, well, that's ultimately the big thing. If you're somebody who the people around you can report on either your great power, therefore being directly relevant to everyone else, or report to your fantastic achievements and talk about the amazing books or the glorious songs. I wanted to say pop songs, and I'm going to double down for that. It's like the glorious pop songs that you're auto-tuning, or even just a fantastic TV show that you've somehow managed to make work based purely on the principle of you're famous because you're famous because you're famous, then hey, all power to you. Except if what they're reporting is the fact that you have too much power and that you're just like some maniac who is going mad with power. Then in which case, no more power for you, please. I would, in fact, rather like you to have a little bit less power than this. What do you think? Do you think that there's something about fame which I'm missing out on? If there's something, of course, as with many subjects, this of course could go on forever. I've not even talked to you about the fact that fame often affects the people who do get famous in very profound ways, in very big ways. That until pretty much the 19th century was almost no one had to deal with anything like it. except for like lords and kings and so on. But even then, it's like, well, yeah, they're the lords and the kings, and they get their bodyguards and they get protection from all the rabble. But I'd really love to see what your thoughts are. You can go and comment in the live chat or in the comment section of this YouTube video, which is a format I'm very much experimenting with. I'm not actually used to doing anything on YouTube. I've done a show before on Relax Radio. You can listen to a whole bunch of old stuff there. Relax about the KNS. It's on Facebook live streamed. It's also on the website of Relax Radio. And I've done a few things also for CSR. You can catch that all on mixcloud.com to find out what I thought about politics 5 years ago. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how this format works out. At the moment, I'm thinking that I probably prefer the morning sun when there's like a bit of illumination to this side. This looks like kind of like shadow void going on here. I swear there's no shadow void. This is just bad writing. But with that, let's move straight on to our second subject for the second half of the Breakfast Buffet. You can listen all right here on YouTube on the Jorge Shaft YouTube channel. But the second part I'm thinking is I very, very recently got back into playing a video game. Now, this is something that I didn't really do for a long time. In fact, back in January, I invited a really good friend of mine onto Relax Radio to discuss, and partly we discussed the fact that both of us were ex-gamers. Back in January, I'd actually deleted my Steam account because of a combination of just the fact that I was spending too much time on it, and I thought that's like I needed to be productive. A big damning thing which I've done with sort of games was the game EU4, where in 2017 I ended up spending, I remember the number very well actually, it was 697 hours on that game in 6 months. And that was something drastic, right? That was so much that the moment I realized just how ludicrously huge that number was and what that meant for just the past 6 months at that point. And also the fact that those 6 months had actually been quite crucial, and just the lost opportunity of having done so really meant that I could never touch that game ever again. I would just, I once later tried to, so went to the menu, but it was just like, this is too much. And I kind of extended that for all the time wasted on other video games. But did I waste all that time? And why am I discussing all this now? Well, to answer the second one first, is because I've decided to slightly ease myself in by getting my first game in 3 months. This is partially as a result of being in quarantine, so I'm always on the lookout for a little bit extra entertainment here and there. It's also because of the fact that a lot of things filled the void. There are still a lot of hours in free time that the games, if you will, represented. And I had to find something else to do in that time. One of the big things I ended up doing was, ironically enough, for somebody who's never probably did anything onto YouTube until today, was YouTube. And I watched, usually my thing there was to watch sort of like documentaries and things discussing sort of factual stuff. Yesterday, I actually watched a super interesting video about riptirids. Riptirids. I can still not pronounce that word. Basically, giant sea scorpions that used to live hundreds of millions of years ago, including one that was 2 meters long, had like huge claws with full snapping up prey and crushing them. It's like, yikes. Jeez, what incredible what used to live in the oceans hundreds of millions of years ago. what fossils will we leave behind, and who will even see them? But that tangent aside, one of the things I very recently found myself doing was I was watching a lot of videos of this game, people playing this game called Among Us. The premise of Among Us is quite simple. There are 10 astronauts who are in some like science fiction base or spaceship, but one of them isn't an astronaut. One or two or three of them isn't an astronaut. They're in fact a murderous psychopath who is rampaging around and trying to kill everyone. The crew, though, can fight back by outnumbering them. They just need to figure out who the psychopaths are and how to and vote them out before the psychopath gets them. Or the imposter, they call it in the game. They call them imposters. It's a game that inherently appeals to me quite a lot, on various levels. One is on the level of psychology. I'm somebody who reads too many psychology books, and it's just something that intrigues me. The human mind, after all, is literally the most complex thing that we know of. There are hundreds of millions of cells in the brain with billions of connections between them, composing, and each of those is a very complicated bit of hardware kit that accounts for a lot of different sort of molecules, components. It suffices to say that the brain is the most complex thing that the brain knows about. The one little joke I did in the first bit I'm going to do again is like it boggles the mind to know about the mind. And a game like Among Us inherently relies on that. It inherently relies on figuring out who is the good guy in the discussions with your fellow players, and who is the baddie. And if you're the baddie, it's the thought process is the journey of how do I get these other people to not select me? How do I get them to, in fact, maybe throw off an innocent off the spaceship to bring me that bit closer to winning out in the end? This aspect definitely appealed. Another aspect that I really quite like is actually the art style, probably enough. It's kind of cutesy, very cartoonish, and there's lots of in the game. There's lots of different sort of depictions of the tiny astronauts with no arms, so they're just kind of like running little things. And whenever they do an interaction, it's like you just see a hand just floating in the air, which is great until you realise that the vast majority of interactions that you see those hands doing is imposters pulling out handguns and knives and murdering you from behind. So that's not so fun. But it is a very, very... The third thing which I quite like is the fact it's free at the end of the day. It's a free mobile game. And it's like, you know what? I don't have to pay anything. And I'm spending a lot of time watching videos of people playing it. And I do mean a lot of time. I was actually watching some full-on live streams. No, I'm doing a live stream now. Here I'm talking about other live streams. I was watching just live streams of people playing this game, sometimes for 3 hours, 4 hours of just all night, going over this game repeatedly, getting into the scenario, figuring out, who is the killer? There's a dead body in electrical. It's always electrical, actually, in one of the maps. But it's like, there's a dead body in electrical. Who was last there? Who did it? I wasn't anywhere near it. I was, in fact, hanging out in the cafeteria. This is an aspect. And so I've decided to go for it and found that's a lot of fun. I've actually enjoyed it quite a bit over the past 24 hours. I've not played on my plan so far has actually been a roaring success on that front. Like, I definitely spent less time playing the game than I did watching videos of it. It sounds really strange when I just say it out loud like this. And I'm just looking at the light briefly and thinking of turning it on. Live on the live stream. Here we go. Give you the quality content that you're all looking for. Switching on the light switch. It's slightly better. Slightly better illumination of my neck here, so it's not just like the dark and evil void that sits on my shoulder. You all. Well, how was it? Where were we? Playing the game, spent less time playing it than I did watching stuff, which is an interesting sort of thought. What's also interesting, and ultimately the bigger deal in this, is in these times of quarantine, where a billion people, something like 2 billion people are in lockdown as of the 6th of April 2020. It's a madness, but very understandable in the midst of a horrific pandemic. Video games provide one source of entertainment. John Lennon famously said that time that you enjoyed wasting was not wasted. And while clearly I have my disagreements with that philosophy, with that idea, I do agree that there is a kernel of truth. The fact of the matter is that before I deleted that Steam account, those hundreds of thousands of hours, not hundreds of thousands, but just thousands of hours of games that were spent on there, wasn't just whiled away. They were times of gripping adventure, harrowing defeat, amazing backstories and funny interactions. There were times of interesting stories and brilliant inspiration for future projects. There were certainly something of merit there. And from that point of view, those thousands of hours were indeed not wasted. They were enjoyed. And I hope that by sticking with this game and playing it just for a little bit, just enough to kind of get my mind ticking, after having successfully sussed out who the two killers were in that one map, in that one game, in the Mirror HQ. To then sit down and get to do the many serious projects and assignments that I have to do. Then, on that front, there's a win. And I hope maybe to see you there in the game one day. Right, actually. Now, I was going to talk a lot more about this game and about video gaming as a philosophical concept and so on, until about half an hour before I started the live stream, when I discovered the most amazing news story of all time. Not of all time, but definitely of all year. Whale sharks, it is titled in the BBC News. Atomic tests solve age puzzle of world's largest fish. What? Even better then. Data from atomic bombs conducted during the Cold War have helped scientists accurately age the world's biggest fish. This is everything about this is just a brilliant story. This is just a wonderful thing to find out. So the thing was that whale sharks, which are the biggest shark, but they are not predators so much as they're filter feeders. I've got a bunch of pictures of them up now. I can link them in the comments if you like. But they're basically big fish that swim around with their mouths wide open and just eat millions and millions and millions of tiny planktons and krill and the like. We know that they were able to live for a very long time. We had no real way of figuring out how long that actually is? Well, we found one way of, well, figuring it out, which is that in the 1950s, a lot of countries, including, I'm listing off from the BBC News website again, several nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, France, and China, conducted atomic bomb tests in different locations. One side effect of all these explosions was the doubling of an atom type, or isotope, known as carbon 14 in the atmosphere. Over time, every living being on the planet has absorbed this extra carbon 14, which still persists. But scientists know the rate at which this isotope decays. It is a very useful marker in determining age. The older the creature, the less carbon 14 you would expect to find. And basically, what happened was that they took these sort of sharks, they took little samples and sort of checked, like, oh, how much radiation do they have? We know that everything got a lot more radioactive in the 1950s. It's actually quite funny, really. It's like another slight tangent, but things got really mad in the 1950s when it came to radiation and when it came to nuclear bombs. There's a lot of famous pictures of in Nevada, the city of Las Vegas was actually quite close to one of the main nuclear bomb testing sites. So there's a bunch of little pictures and films of just Las Vegas sitting peacefully, and or even people just like on balconies looking, and whereas far, far in the distance there's a nuclear bomb blast going off as the US Army was testing it. It's incredible. It's really fun. And it's just the exact bit of good news that I really, really needed in my day to day. To find out that this big problem, this big mystery, how exactly do you age? How do you find how old this gigantic shark is, which just filter feeds, swims around, not really doing much else all day? How old is it? How do you figure that out? Well, turns out that if you go through it, you go and look for the remains of nuclear bomb blasts in the 1950s. You go, huh, well, this shark has still got all this radiation. So that means this shark must have been around in the 1950s. Damn, this shark must be over 70, is almost over 70 years old. Damn. I'm going to finish off, though, this little segment on how the ending of the article itself. And that is, they interviewed this guy called Dr. Meekan. Dr. Meekan is Dr. Mark Meekan, that's it. I was looking for his first name, and I couldn't really find it. And he finished off his whole thing saying that this has huge implications for the species, the fact that they get so old. It suggests that these things are probably intensely vulnerable to overharvesting. They are just not built for humans to exploit. However, whale sharks are a fantastic ambassador for marine life, and one that has lifted so many people out of poverty. It is a great news story. It shows that there is a silver lining to the mushroom cloud after all. This is because whale sharks are, well, huge 18-meter long leviathans that just swim around and eat plankton. And so they're very, very popular as a tourist fish, if you will. Lots of people travel the world, or well, they did before those lockdowns and the coronavirus, just for the chance, the opportunity to swim one of these behemoths. Why wouldn't they? I'd quite like to as well. All things aside. But with those behemoths comes a responsibility. There comes the truth. Everything that grows really big, generally, does so because they have very long lifespans and reproduce very slowly. The vast majority of very, very large animals over the course of human existence has gone extinct precisely because humans hunted them to extinction. It's a horrible fall, but no, we are the reason why there are no more mammoths. We are the reason why there are no more giant sloths. The reason why there are almost no more rhinos left. Hell, some species of rhino are just outright extinct because of us. Maybe we shouldn't add the whale shark to that long and very unfortunate list of creatures who we were just not aware, and just not sustainable, I won't say practical, but more just sort of aware enough to handle properly. And it'd be very, very disappointing too, especially when whale sharks were slowly but surely ticking out of the extinction area. Was it like last year they were upgraded from threatened to endangered, which is not great, not a good situation, but much better than being threatened. And that's certainly much better than being severely threatened too. I'd quite like to see a whale shark one day. It's probably one of the reasons why I've selected this story. I think that to swim with such a beast, to have that picture, would be very, very worthy, very notable. But as I said in the first half, frivolous travel may well be something I'll get frowned on in the future. So perhaps maybe I should spend more time in this video just chatting about stuff. I say this is for kids, so I might as well, shooting the shit, having fun, figuring out new formats, experimenting. What do you think? Let me know in the comment sections. I'll make sure to read them, I'll make sure to reply. And I will see you again tomorrow. In the meantime, and in between time, have a very good day. Goodbye.